Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps from AOPA.
This is the place where we hopefully answer your maintenance questions, especially those thorny ones that your mechanic has a hard time answering. So, if you have a question and if you'd like to be on the show, contact us at podcasts@aopa.org and we'll try to get you on.
And don't forget to follow and subscribe and be alerted. So anytime a new show comes out, you can get right to it.
And if you'd like to be on our mailing list, get our quarterly, our monthly newsletter and other interesting stuff, probably the easiest way to do that is to grab your smartphone and text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777, and a little bot will pop up and ask you for your name and email address and put you on our mailing list. That is, text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777 to put yourself on our list.
Big news these days
What's that?
with the fuel thing.
The fuel thing.
The
Oh.
fuel thing.
Everybody needs fuel.
You talking about what happened at University of North Dakota?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. That was I found that very disappointing because I think everybody knows I'm a huge fan of the transition to unleaded fuel and would like to see that happen as quickly and smoothly as possible. And University of North Dakota had been running a test in their flight school of the Swift 94 UL unleaded in their training fleet. And last week they announced that they were pulling out of the test and going back to 100 low lead. And the reason that they gave for that was that they believed that they were having a higher rate of valve seat wear running the Swift 94 UL.
So how exactly would unleaded create valve seat wear? I mean, I know they talked about
the mechanism.
What's the mechanisms? Because they
well,
talked about it.
That's what
pummeling the seat into the head, but
yeah, that's what really troubles me because the FAA did a lot of testing of this back when they were doing their fuel initiative out of the Tech Center in Atlantic City. That was 10, 15 years ago. And they ran a lot of tests of leaded versus unleaded fuel, and they could never detect any difference in wear. And so this was very surprising. There's a very, very common belief among many A&P mechanics, maybe even most A&P mechanics. I haven't taken a poll, that somehow lead is necessary to, quote, lubricate the valves, unquote.
I've heard that.
And I've heard a lot of mechanics advise clients who are like running unleaded MoGas, like in experimentals and stuff, that they really ought to run a tank 100 low lead through there every few flights to keep the valves, quote, lubricated, unquote. And as far as I'm concerned, that's all a lot of nonsense. But what really disappointed me about UND was the way they responded to this. That what I wish they'd done is said, "Hey, we think maybe there's a problem here, so we're going to divide our training fleet into two groups, and we're going to run one group on the 94 UL and the other group on 100 low lead, and then we're going to, do some comparison stuff." They didn't do that. They just pulled out. And there may have been political pressure or something. It's hard to know. Once the mechanics there and the conspiracy theory part of me.
We need more conspiracy theory.
Maybe those mechanics were looking for a problem because they really believed that lead was necessary, and people tend to see what they want to see. But but anyway, once the issue came up, I imagine there were some people in administration at UND saying, "Oh my God, if the parents of our flight school people think we're using them as guinea pigs or something,
Well,
they
I
would
can see
freak
that.
out." So
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
I
what
don't
is
really
it?
know what happened behind the scenes, but anyway, I was very disappointed that they pulled out the way they did, all lock, stock, and barrel, and wish they'd taken a more scientific approach to get to the bottom of whatever was happening, if indeed anything really was happening.
Why would it wear the valve seats and not say, the cylinder walls? Is the valves made out of softer material?
Well,
Are they bronze?
first of all, I'm skeptical that it
Yeah.
really did. The method that they were using, allegedly this is based on their press release, that they were using to measure this wear was dry tappet clearance. And dry tappet clearance is a horribly inaccurate way to measure that, because first of all, there's no such thing as a dry tappet, and second of all, the dry tappet clearance is the sum of a whole bunch of different interfaces all added up, and that's why dry tappet clearance specs are like wide enough to drive a truck through. I think on Lycoming's, it's what 0.28 to 0.80 or something like that.
Yeah,
or, I mean 0.28 to 0.80.
28,000 to like 80. It's huge.
It's just a huge allowable spec, because the measurement can kind of vary all over the place, and the only reason you take the measurement is that if the thing is wildly out of whack, then you put a different length push rod in to get it somewhere in the acceptable range.
When you say dry tappet, that means you've expunged the oil from the
Yeah.
hydraulic
In
tappet,
theory,
so
that means the
completely
lifter
flat. The
is
lifter,
completely
yeah.
flat. But really,
Yeah,
the
right.
only way to get it completely flat is to take it apart. It's very
And-
hard to get
and
a
even then,
lifter.
You would have had to start with a known value for each and every one, because they're all
Yeah.
different. So
Yeah.
you would have had to measure it when you put the engine on, and then your subsequent measurements would have to account for which other items are wearing, and you have to identify which ones are wearing and identify if fuel could be a cause of it. It just doesn't make good sense to me.
Yeah.
Now, the political part does.
Yeah. There's another possibility that I don't give a lot of credence to, but I've just been exploring all the things that could possibly have accounted for it. And one thing that they may or may not have taken into account is the fact that the primary determinant on valve seat wear is the pressure that's pushing the valve against the seat, which is primarily a function of peak combustion chamber pressure. And if you are running a lower octane fuel, you will have a higher peak combustion chamber pressure. The higher octane fuels, the thing that makes them higher octane fuels is that the flame front burns more slowly, and so the pressure peak is broader and not as high. It's a kinder, gentler pressure peak that happens inside the cylinder with higher octane fuel.
Yeah.
So it's conceivable that the drop from 100 octane to 94 octane, I mean,
Gave you
could
predictable
be
results.
compensated for by retarding the ignition timing by a degray or something like that.
Yeah.
But nobody looked into any of that. They just pulled the plug on it unceremoniously. So I was unfortunate, because I think first of all, it was bad PR for unleaded avgas, but also it was a lost opportunity to really do some scientific testing with a control group and stuff, which I wish they had done.
I wish I could have been a fly on the wall in the conversation between Swift and UND, because I'm sure Swift didn't want this to happen, and they probably proposed a lot of what you're saying, right? And
that's a horrible.
Yeah.
I was speaking to somebody the other day who's, I won't name, but is a fairly high profile figure in all this. And I said, gee, since since UND pulled out of it, I wonder if we could get somebody like Embry-Riddle to pick up the ball. And he said, oh man, after what UND did, I bet Embry-Riddle wouldn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, politically. So
missed opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah. That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Well, that's really the function of lead, is to raise the octane.
correct.
Which is what, Dad used to work at Phillips as one of the guys involved in, what do you call it? Cracking.
Cracking the petroleum, right?
Yeah, cracking it and figuring out octane and all that. So that's very interesting. That I don't know how we ever got started on the thought that the lead lubricates.
I don't know. It's an old
Curious where
wives'
that
tale
got
that's
started.
been around for ages, but every scientific test that I've heard of, including the work that the FAA did, seems to indicate quite the opposite.
Yeah.
And plus, how long have we been running unleaded fuel in cars?
Oh yeah.
But
Interesting. You mentioned that. I was thinking about it some time ago. Back in the 60s, Mom had an Impala, and Dad was so excited when it made it to 50,000 miles. And
really?
at 50,000 miles, you pull the heads off and redo the valves because they were all messed up with lead and all that sort of thing. And then we switched to unleaded fuel for cars, and suddenly all of that stuff went away.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that drastically affects this, which is really hard to control for, is exactly how the valves and seats are ground when the cylinder is prepared. It's sort of a black art. The valve and the seat are ground at slightly different angles to control the contact area between the valve and the seat when the valve is closed, and a tiny difference in how the angle at which things are ground makes a big difference in terms of the contact area.
Yeah.
If the contact area is too small, then the PSI is very high when the valve is closed because the pressure is being
the impact,
and that's going to accelerate wear, and it also causes a poor heat transfer path for exhaust valves. Although the biggest wear problem is intake valves, not exhaust valves, because intake valves are a lot larger.
Well, and the intake valve has a much narrower contact width than the exhaust valve, because the exhaust valve has to transfer heat, and the intake valve doesn't. All it needs to do, all the intake valve needs to do is seal.
So they're ground differently?
Yeah, the intake valve is at 30, and the exhaust valve is ground at 45.
And if the contact area is large, then you get lower PSI and you get better heat transfer, but you get a lot of deposit buildup.
Right.
So it's sort of a black art to get it just right.
We did this
different
in school.
Cylinder shops have different theories about the best way to do it.
I remember being trained to grind valves in school, and it's not like there's a computer that grinds the valve and gets it perfect. It's a human, right? That this machine just shoves it in there.
Get your Sue valve grinding machine, man. We've got one in the back room.
Mm-hmm.
So I could definitely see a quality control thing there.
And I know there are some shops, I don't think the factory is this way, but there's some shops that actually grind the valves twice at two different angles.
There's different angles for the valve and the seat. The valve actually just gets one cut, but the seat gets 3 cuts. The face where the contact is, the top surface, which is very shallow, and then the bottom surface, which is very steep.
Mm-hmm.
You'd think it would be computer done by now. They just put it on some big CRC machine.
Well, I think Continental.
It probably is computer done at the engine factories.
Okay. But what about field overhaul shops?
Field overhaul shops
done by hand.
Don't do it by hand typically. Mm-hmm. And then you lap it in place, and that's when it seats.
Yeah,
you can.
And of course, I don't know about these engines at UND, whether they were Lycoming rebuilds or whether they were field overhauled or whether they have their own captive overhaul shop at UND that does them. I mean, I just don't know. So,
interesting.
But The line saying that the valve sank too deep in the seats, they didn't know where they started. They didn't, that's a bad measurement in and of itself because of all the uncertainties and the whole valve train. So you're saying that that was just an imprecise science and we should have.
It's not a great way to measure it. I mean, if you really want to get to the bottom of this, you want to be able to measure that, to the nearest thousandth of an inch, and dry tappet clearance is a very gross measurement because of all of the pieces and parts that go together to make dry tappet clearance.
Our first question is from Bill, who may have dodged a spinning bullet. How you doing, Bill?
Hi, how are you, Paul?
Good
to see you guys.
Good to have you. What's
So
up?
my question has to do is I've got a 182S, 3-bladed propeller Macaulay, and it hasn't been overhauled in several years. And I'm at year 7. I have about 600 hours on it since the last time it was overhauled, I'd say in 2016. So, as you know, the manufacturer recommends 5 years. And I always took it up to my IA every year, 2 years ago and last year, and said, "Hey, Tom, what do you think?" He says, "I don't know, the thing looks awful good to me. The flex is fine. There's no looseness. There's no anything wrong. I think it can go another year." So this goes on till this March, when I had a separate problem with the engine. I had to send the engine off to get it, the tappets redone, and so the cam was a mess. And Lycoming paid for it, by the way, but that's a separate issue.
Oh, that's nice.
So I sent the prop off to New England Propeller, and they whacked at it, and it took about six weeks to get it back. And they said, the hub was really close to being trashed. And unfortunately, from the corrosion, we were able to, machine it down and make it serviceable again. So I know Mike likes to be cheap and go on conditions of condition.
That is not being cheap.
Wow.
And I'm saying to myself, okay, do I go 7 years? And if I went 8 years on the prop, I might have had to get a new hub. So what can I, as a private pilot, do for my poor propeller sitting in a hangar? Do I spray it with WD-40? Do I hit it with demineralized oil? What can I do to extend the life beyond the 5 years? Because the indication I have is I should have overhauled it probably at the 5-year point.
Well, none of those things you suggested would get to the inside of the hub where the problem was. Yes.
Although I have seen some places say if you use LPS3, it can kind of help seal where the prop hub interface is. I've never done that.
Interesting.
That's what it's getting in, right? I'm assuming where the blades.
So I'm just wondering how do I stay with a 5-year as I'm learning? I probably should do, or can hopefully each year, year 7, year 8, I follow the Mike Bush philosophy, and then find out I got to get a new hub redone, put on the engine or the
We
prop.
send out a lot of propellers from aircraft that just decide they want to have a reseal or an IRAN. Most of them are around the 12-year mark, and so far I've not had a single hub be rejected. Now I'm not. That's just anecdotal. So
I've been sitting here biting my tongue here.
So before Mike goes into his diatribe, because I know exactly what Mike's going to say, I want to tell Bill that I've been in the same situation. My prop and hub were pulled longer than a 5-year interval, and they told me that I had corrosion on my hub and it required a new hub. I don't know how long it went, but I've been in the same boat.
I think they're kind of like the weather guy. It's like it's June, but there is a possibility of a snowflake, and they have to be alarmist. I don't know, maybe not.
I don't pull my prop anymore because Mike has said, don't look, you won't see a problem.
and we don't have props coming off. I mean, you don't have propellers coming off and airplanes falling out of the sky because of it. And most airplanes, if I look out on the ramp there's very few Macaulays on 210s anymore. But, on the 182s, the legacy 182s, not the restart. Quite a few Macaulays still on those, and man, those guys have, they're waiting for engine overhaul to get to 2,000 hours or whatever, and they forget about the 12-year limit on the TBO, and so now they're at 20 and 22 years, and that's how long the prop's been on there.
Wow.
Yeah, my Macaulays have been on that long, and
Yeah.
I'm not in a hurry to do anything about them. I want to make two comments here, two different comments. The first comment is prop shops are like a piece of work. Prop shops are these zero tolerance outfits.
Right.
That if they take a prop apart, they always find something wrong with it. The fact that the prop shop finds something wrong with the propeller doesn't mean that the propeller was unsafe. It just means that it failed some obscure technical specification that the prop shops are required to abide by. So I'm going to switch my comment number two. I have been a NTSB accident report junkie for about 5 decades. I have read thousands and thousands of GA accident reports, NTSB reports. I subscribe to a monthly publication called the NTSB Reporter that sends me a whole bunch of them every month. And that's exactly what I do when I'm in the bathroom. I read accident. And in 50 years of looking at those things, I have not seen one case, not one, of a general aviation accident caused by a high time propeller. I've seen propellers that detach themselves from the airplane. I think, didn't Senator Inhofe have one of those back some years ago?
Don't remember.
But that's not the fault of the propeller. That's the fault of whoever it was that torqued the nuts on.
It torqued it on. Yeah.
I have seen 1 or 2 propeller-related accidents involving turbine airplanes with beta props, but those are way more complicated than the props that are on our piston GA airplanes. But I've ever seen an accident caused by a high time prop. So it just doesn't worry me. And I know that I know in my heart that if I ever sent my props in, they would be essentially beyond repair. That I would basically have to replace them with new ones. Because I have those old horrible Macaulay threaded props.
Yeah, that threaded hub.
And they don't make parts for them anymore. And the only way you can keep them alive is to go find salvage yard components for them and stuff. And so those props, if anything ever goes wrong with them, they'll have to get replaced with new props. But until something goes, until they start leaking, or I start getting some kind of RPM regulation problem or something, I mean, I just don't see any good reason to send them to the prop shop, because I know if I ever do, they're going to condemn them.
They have very high
so
standards
that's kind of my
at the prop
attitude.
shop. And the reason they have very high standards is because the props are subject to very high forces. We learn all about this in school. They put the fear of God in us about, centrifugal forces and the twisting forces and how, how much abuse a prop hub takes. But you're right. I mean, the only prop I know that came off was my husband's prop, and it got ripped off at Reno. That was not the
But again, it wasn't.
It wasn't the propeller's fault.
There wasn't anything wrong with the prop. It was the attachment of the prop to the engine.
No,
It's
that was
amazing.
the stick shaker's fault.
The airplane still flies without a propeller. It just doesn't fly for very long.
Well,
But
it plays hell with the center of gravity.
yeah, but you're right. I mean, my blades have been loose. I've looked at it. I've greased it. Whenever we come to the annual, you look at the prop and you're like, prop looks good. There's not much to do, and I just move on to the rest of the stuff on the plane.
Now, the thing you do it. the thing about
What's
you do have to
inside.
take seriously about a prop are the blades.
Yeah.
If you ever get like a big
Nick.
nick in the
Yeah.
blade, it's very very important to dress it out if it's dressable, and
Yeah.
because I saw um, a a stop action movie. I don't know where they were flashing a strobe light at a propeller when it was in operation. I saw this years ago, and they ran the prop through its RPM range, and you could actually watch what happens to the blades, and
Mm.
it's scary as hell. The
Don't
the
look.
the blades bend. They develop standing waves on them. The amount of flex in an aluminum propeller blade when it's spinning is absolutely mind-boggling. And you see something like that, you never look at a prop neck the same again,
Yeah.
because that propeller blade is being
You think
bent.
that's bad? Look at a rotor blade on a helicopter.
Oh,
But
But
let's
but
not
the
go
thing
there.
is that
But yeah.
prop blades are easily inspectable. Your IA can look at the prop blade and see if there's anything wrong with it. The hub is the black box. He can't look inside. They unfortunately didn't put like borescope openings and stuff in prop hubs. Wish they did. Wish they put more of them in engines too. But we can't
And
look
I'm not
inside
sure.
the hub.
How does corrosion get in there? Because I live in Southern California where it never rains. We don't have moisture. I don't wash
Well,
the
I mean
airplane.
that's the other thing that the like all TBOs, prop TBOs are one size fits all numbers.
Yeah.
They don't take into account anything about how the prop is used, where it lives, whether it's hangared, whether it lives outdoors, and so their recommendations are, which have to work for every propeller in the fleet, have to be calibrated to like the worst case airplane in the fleet. They base that 5 years or 7 years, whatever it is. It depends on the particular propeller. On sitting on an airplane that's sitting out on a tie down in South Florida, or something like that.
Pensacola.
And it may be appropriate for a prop that sits outside in Pensacola to to be taken apart every 5 years. But if the airplane is based in Denver, or if it's hangared in California or something, the recommended time is way too conservative. It's really. I mean, I thought your IA's attitude of saying, "Hey, broke, don't
really
fix
good.
it," was excellent.
Mhm.
And it's sort of a shame that you succumbed to the temptation to send it in just because the engine was down. But I understand that. But once you send it to the prop shop, they're going to find something wrong with it, because and it's not because they're evil people. It's because they are required to measure a gazillion things and do all sorts of NDT, and there's a big overhaul manual that tells them exactly what they have to do.
They're a repair station. They have to do it by the book.
Yeah.
Yep.
So and like I say, that it's typically zero tolerance stuff. It's a little less than zero tolerance for the blades. They can actually do quite a bit to the blades. They can shorten the blades a fair amount, and still be in spec. But what they have to do with the hub is pretty much non-negotiable.
Yeah.
But this isn't about being cheap.
Yeah.
To me, this is
wise.
Yeah, I think I agree. In my past, we used to do a lot of aircraft recovery for insurance companies and for the NTSB, and we found we recovered several airplanes due to.
Paul is an expert at flying unairworthy airplanes.
Yeah.
It's his specialty.
And we've recovered some airplanes where it was always about the installation, and you'd be surprised. Well, maybe you wouldn't, but there's an O-ring inside the propeller hub. And when you install the propeller on the crankshaft, then there's the flange of the crankshaft that goes into the propeller hub, and that's where the O-ring seals.
Very important.
Well,
O-ring.
Very important O-ring. But I can count more than a few that were installed where the mechanic had never installed a propeller before and had an O-ring, was given an O-ring, not realizing that there was already one inside the propeller,
Oh,
and slid it on the outside
Shoot.
of the flange on the crankshaft. So then when he torqued it down, he's torquing on top of a rubber O-ring.
So he's got
and
a
it
soft
takes it-
joint. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's got a soft joint. It takes about
it's like
5
a
to 10
cylinder with
hours.
RTV. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Cylinder with RTV.
Mhm.
And it takes it's sometimes an hour, sometimes 10 before the stretch on the hold bolts comes loose and the prop either departs the airplane or partially departs the airplane. And
Which is worse.
it's I don't know which is worse.
How does a prop partially depart?
It vibrates
Well,
the heck out of the engine.
It does. Yeah. So we
Yeah.
got to this one Bonanza and 2 of the prop stud nuts, well, the stud bolts had broken off, found them in the cowling. 2 others, the nuts had backed off, and 2 others were tight. And so the propeller, when we got to it, had about an 1/8 of an inch gap between the propeller and the prop flange on one side, and it was tight on the other.
And what does that do to the prop flange? Does that trash the crankshaft?
Well,
Is
yeah,
there
the whole
balling? There's
the
probably
whole
balling
engine was
between-
the whole engine was trashed because the prop goes to low pitch stops.
Mhm.
And the RPM, the last RPM on that airplane, the last RPM that the co-pilot saw before he couldn't see the panel anymore was about 3,100.
Oh boy.
And you lost a lot
valve,
of oil.
valve,
Ouch.
valve strike smileys all over the pistons.
everywhere,
probably.
and oil went everywhere, and
Mm.
yeah, and the magnetos came apart. They were able to get to an airport. They had just
Mhm.
enough thrust for a controlled descent of sorts.
That sounds like
Mm.
just the kind of airplane that Paul would love to fly. Just-
Yeah, just throw a prop
I
on
don't
it.
think
I
don't think
don't
he
need
flew
all.
that
I don't
one.
need all of those nuts. I just need a couple.
I'm going
that
to
far.
recover. I'm going to recover something not quite that bad tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
but Paul, safety wire holding those bolts on, right?
No safety wire.
No.
Oh, okay. Some of the
There,
installations
there,
have
there
said,
are
like the
on
Lycoming.
some
The Lycomings.
yeah.
Yeah,
typically.
and I've seen that
Yeah.
And, safety wire on those things
42,000s.
is like a week's worth of effort.
Yeah.
that safety wire holding thing when those bolts want to go.
Yeah, it's interesting on the Continental engines. Typically, there will be these long stud nuts or studs
Yeah.
sticking through. You put the nuts on, and there's the holes in the studs.
Mhm.
And we'll see people put safety wire in that. Which it doesn't hurt anything, but
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and it's not
Yeah,
of
to
any
do.
particular value. But on the
Yeah.
Lycoming engines, like Mike was saying, to do those in pairs, that's a challenge. And
It's
I love
hard,
it when those
yeah.
come in because I can do it faster than anybody in the shop. And I tell them it should take this long. And they're all like, oh, you can't do it that fast. And of course, I can't not then demonstrate.
But that wire
Yeah.
hurts my hands. That's the worst
Yes.
wire safety wiring job
That,
on the whole
so
thing.
if you have to change the alternator belt, it's very expensive.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
4-hour event.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I have a spare wrapped around the prop just to get me home. Not that it's very good shape. Anyway, we're getting off subject. for
No,
poor
sorry,
Bill.
Bill.
He's
Yeah.
hanging on.
Anyway, well,
No.
the good thing, Bill, is that you probably won't ever have to overhaul that prop again in your flying
Yeah.
career.
Don't be tempted.
Well, what I'm getting out of this is, A, if it needs a paint job, or it's got a lot of real bad nicks, or it's not holding RPM, it's kind of sluggish, it's not the governor, it's just not right. And my IA says, I think it needs an overhaul now. That's,
No, try a reseal with an IRAN. There's no need to overhaul it.
Don't use the
okay.
overhaul word. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
don't go overhaul. Go
Yeah.
IRAN.
Okay.
If you just have to do something, just to feel better, then yeah, it takes a lot of nicks to make a blade unairworthy.
Yeah.
And I have
a
painted a
reseal
blade.
is basically an overhaul of the hub where they leave the blades alone.
And I
more
have
or less.
painted a blade on the plane.
Oh yeah,
It's a little
Oh,
bit
yeah.
of work, but you can paint it on the plane. Okay.
all right,
That's about all an A&P is allowed to do with the prop.
Yeah.
is paint the
clean and
blades.
paint. Yeah,
Mhm.
good question, Bill.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Good luck
Thanks
with
for
that
calling.
experiment.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Our next question is from Tate, who is a proud member of the Overthinkers Anonymous Club. So you're welcome here among friends. What's going on today, Tate?
Well, so I was listening to many of y'all's podcasts, and oil levels always seem to be an issue. Somebody thinks they're blowing by too much oil, and I fly a 2006 SR-22 with about 2,200 hours on it, so I'm trying to get as much life out as I can. But my engine burns oil, and sometimes it seems to burn more oil than it does other times. And I started thinking about it, and it's kind of obvious. If you let it sit for a couple of days, obviously your oil level comes up, and your oil burn goes down. So I started thinking, is
Well,
this
there
one of
you
those
go.
things?
That's trouble.
Right? Yeah, that is taking me down a rabbit hole. My wife's like, what are you doing? I said, don't worry about it. But are we all just scaring ourselves to death by checking our oil at different intervals? If a flight school checks it between each flight and they add another quart, are they just dumping another quart off into the atmosphere? Or,
Yes.
is the right way to figure out how much oil we actually have in the engine to drain all the oil and then put a couple of quarts in there and then crank it and fly it till the engine seizes and then divide the number of hours until we
No.
crash?
Probably
No.
not the
Terrible
optimal
plan,
procedure.
right? But
Sounds
then
like
you're
something.
out of oil.
No,
I'm
the-
liking Tate, man. He's
Yeah.
thinking just the way kind of thoughts I would think.
Pull the chute, when the
Yeah,
engine
pull the
stops, tag out.
I've done a lot of experimenting. I have a 2002 G1 SR-22,
Mm-hmm.
and we've actually talked about it because my oil consumption was up at about a quart per hour not too long ago, and I did anyway. So I went through the whole process, and I did an awful lot, and I'm still doing a lot of experimenting with customers' airplanes as well on how this works. And I'm a big proponent of not running your engine right before you drain the oil, because then you've got oil up inside the engine. And my way to prove that is run the engine today, check the oil an hour after you've run the engine, and then leave it and come back a week later and see how much more oil that you've gained into the sump. And if you change the oil an hour after you ran it, the week later, that amount that you have, the extra, that's how much you left in the engine that you didn't get out during the oil change. So if you're doing an oil consumption comparison, pick a length of time that's at least a day. And this is just anecdotal. Pick a week if you want, however much time, but just make it consistent and use that as your method to determine your oil consumption. But the second question is actually about oil level and whether it's okay to fly on this flight. And if you're just landed, put fuel in the airplane, you pull the dipstick out and it shows 6 quarts, well, you've been on the ground for 15 minutes. There's at least 7, maybe 7.5 in that 8-quart sump. If it shows 5, you've still got quite a bit more than 5. So that it's two different questions.
Yeah, no, but it's not in the sump. It's all adhered to all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's all over. Yeah, it's all over the engine. It's on the back of the pistons and
And
cillinders.
gravity is going to work eventually.
The dipstick only measures what's in the sump, not what's in the
Exactly.
engine. And I want to take issue with something Paul said, because I don't think he really meant it. But if you're interested in measuring oil consumption, to me, there's only one reasonable way to do that, and that is to keep track of how much makeup oil you put in the engine over the course of an oil change interval. Then you're dealing with it over a relatively long period of time, 50 hours or 33 hours or something like that. And then you will get some sort of a meaningful average. It still won't be, completely accurate.
Right.
But if you try to gauge oil consumption using the dipstick, you're going to get wildly oscillating numbers, because the dipstick, first of all, is not particularly accurate. It kind of depends on whether the airplane is sitting on level ground or whatever it is when you take the reading, but more importantly, it takes a very, very long time after you run the engine for the oil to get from whatever it's adhering to in the engine down into the sump. It's not the, but I think you might have mentioned the oil filter. It's not the oil filter, because the oil filter has a check valve on it, and any oil in the oil filter stays in the oil filter.
No, it's all up in the engine.
It's oil that's adhered to all of these big metal parts in the engine and it takes longer for it to drain back into the engine if it's single weight oil than if it's multi-grade oil. Because the single weight oil is a lot thicker at room temperature, so it doesn't flow back nearly as fast.
Right. Yeah, I figured it had a lot to do with like outside air temperature. You know, I flew into Jackson, Mississippi, not Jackson, Tennessee the other day, and they pointed my airplane to the north, and the engine cooled down really fast. And I noticed when I checked my oil sump, it was a lot lower than I would have expected it, because I assumed that the oil just didn't come off the metal part.
So just log the makeup oil you put in, and then use that number at the next oil change to determine approximately what the average oil consumption was over that oil change interval period. The dipstick is fine for getting sort of a general idea of how much oil is in the sump. It's best to take the reading after the engine's been sitting for a while, at least overnight, as a minimum. From when the last flight was.
Do it at the same time each time. So
So the only problem with checking your buildup, your added oil over a period of the 30 or 40 or 50 hours, whatever you run, is if you have an 8-quart sump and you consistently decide you're going to fill it to 8 quarts, then especially in a Cirrus, if you're doing a long climb, the crankshaft gears down in that oil, it creates a huge mist in the engine, which is why people say, oh, well, I just dump out the top quart in that first hour of flying.
Yeah, it's during the climb. It's when you're in a nose up position.
Right, which is largely true. So you need to establish, and this is why I like to do it like 3 days afterwards or whatever. You need to establish where your oil level kind of settles. So if you try to keep it at 6, that's fine, or 7. But if you're keeping it at 8, you're going to have an artificially high oil consumption reading, if you will.
Right.
So
it's more like an oil distribution than it's
well, it's kind of the same thing with the flight school. You know, if they were to add a quart between each student,
sure,
obviously their average is going to be super high.
Yeah. So you have to wait a few days to check it. And I just use that as my litmus test. But on a rare occasion, it's kind of weird. I would check my oil. It'd be down at 4 quarts. Mm-hmm. Like, what in the world? And so I would add 2 quarts into it and then make my return trip home and check it the next day, and it'd be at 8. I'm like, what in the world? Yeah. So you have to be careful how you track those.
Another interesting or important point of reference is knowing what the minimum amount of oil that the engine actually needs to run properly, and on the IO550N, that number is 3.5 quarts. So if there's 3.5 quarts in the engine, it will make oil pressure and it will run okay. Now, I'm not suggesting that you ever run it that low, but that's how low it can go before. And I've had the pleasure of looking at engine monitor data from a Cirrus that actually ran the oil down below that number, and it was very interesting to watch, because you'd watch the oil pressure, and it would the oil pressure would started going down, and then it started oscillating, and you could just visualize that pump sucking foam instead of liquid. But that happened at exactly 3.5 quarts. When the airplane got on the ground the next morning, they drained the oil, and there was exactly 3.5 quarts in the engine, which is exactly where the type certificate data sheet says that the unusable oil level is. So, as long as you have 4.5, 5 quarts in there, you're fine. And so most people try to fill the sump to 6 and let it get down to 5 and add a quart. But again, depending on when you measure it, it's best to measure it, before the first flight in the morning, not try to measure it after you come in from a flight.
Not after.
You can't even read the oil on the dipstick right after a flight. It's too clear, right?
Yeah.
I can't see it.
And it's all run
depends
up
on how old the oil
too
is.
hot. Yeah.
My oil is nice and visible right after the first run.
Really?
Oh, is an hour before you pull the cylinders?
No.
Okay.
Well, it's a little bit better after I did those two
I
cylinders.
bet it's a lot better, man.
Yeah.
Let's not talk
Well.
about my engine.
I don't think you're overthinking it, Tate. I think it's important to know, what your engine's doing with its oil, where it's going. That's good to know, but just think about averages.
But as Paul pointed out, measuring oil consumption and figuring out when to add makeup oil are two totally different things.
Right.
And the methodology for determining those two things are totally different.
Okay,
And
so I should not run my engine to failure and then see how it goes.
Probably not.
Yes. Don't fly. Don't fly like I fly. Do something better than that. And good on you for going to 2200. I'm at about 23 on mine, and you've got a lot of life left in that engine.
Well, I just did my oil change yesterday and sent all my borescope images to Savvy. So I'll race you and see how fast you can get to 2500 and I can get to 2500.
But keep watching the oil filter carefully, because if something comes apart in the bottom end, you want to know it right as soon as you can.
I actually went to go cut my oil filter open yesterday, and somebody had stole my oil filter cutting tool. So I have no idea where on the airfield it is.
Well, of all things to steal.
I know generally where it is.
You probably left your wallet right next to it, and they took the cutter instead of your wallet.
That's right. The cutter's got more value than the wallet does these days.
Right. Cool.
Well, excellent question, Tate.
Yeah.
Thank y'all.
Appreciate the call.
Okay, so we got a couple of letters about the air coupe radio popping, actually, which I think is interesting. First from Clive in the UK, and you can tell he's in the UK because he corrected our grammar. So he says, "Hi, just a thought about the question above. The guy said the radio was okay up to 1200 RPM. He said there's no S in RPM, so up to 1200 RPM. I'm not so familiar with mags on a plane, though I've had mine apart. But what happens when a magneto condenser or capacitor fails? On an old car years ago, when a car had points, it would cause radio interference when it failed, and of course increase sparking at the points. Just a thought."
Well, he knows an awful lot about mags if he took one apart. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of mechanics that have never taken a mag apart.
Yeah. But the failure of a condenser, I guess they call them condensers in mags. That's an old word.
Old term.
Would generate RFI, and also would generate arcs across the contact points that would cause them to get pitted and nasty and have to be replaced eventually.
So is the question about he has popping sound in the headsets and he's trying to resolve it, or he's just trying to imagine what might cause it?
I think he's suggesting that could have been a cause, but I don't think the caller mentioned any problem with his ignition system.
Well, if you leave a spark plug cap loose, if it comes loose, you'll get a popping sound.
Is that
and it'll go with RPM, absolutely, and it's very distinguishable.
It'll go with RPM, as in when you increase RPM, you'll hear.
That's like the B nut on the spark
nut
plug, or whatever you call it. I don't know if it's called a B nut.
Cap nut on the spark plug. If it's not connected or not connected well, you'll have the arcing will happen there, and you'll hear it in the headset every time. It's like arcing is kind of like a lightning strike. It emits pretty much everything in the frequency band.
RF spectrum. Yeah.
RF spectrum. It gets it all, and it's so close that you're going to hear it in the headset.
Hey, I have a question. Whatever happened to the A nut?
I don't know
That's a
what
good
B nut
question.
stands for, but I'm sure there's some guy's name that starts with a
Oh,
B.
but we'll get more mail.
More
Was
Yeah.
mail.
How about, was
Somebody will
it
tell
Billy Beam?
Billy Bean. Somebody knows. Somebody knows the answer to that question.
We're going to get another letter. Anybody who
Yeah.
knows where the term B nut came from, please write in.
And RPMs
okay,
doesn't
so-
have an S on the end.
That's right.
Yeah.
So just don't forget that.
Mm.
Another idea about the air coop. He says, "Hey, Paul, Mike, and Colleen, I had an idea on the air coop radio noise issue a caller raised during your most recent show. Acknowledging that I don't know a ton about air coop, I wonder air coop, not air coops. I wonder if it has a generator instead of an alternator, and perhaps an old vibratory voltage regulator. Years ago, I owned an Apache with dual generators. The generators in my airplane typically didn't generate enough voltage to support the electrical system until the engine got to about 1,000 or 1,100 RPMs.
Yeah, that's normal.
RPM,
So the generators
singular.
RPMs.
Sorry, RPM. So
Oh,
the
is that an
generators
EM thing?
really disconnected from the electrical system until the RPM was up, which was nerve-wracking, of course, knowing that I was discharging my battery during taxi. If his setup is similar, it's an additional RPM-dependent device he could be experiencing in his airplane. If the system in this vintage airplane is similar, I wonder if the regulator is to blame. That's from Dan.
I've never known a regulator to
Cause noise.
cause that kind of noise. Not a popping noise for sure, because when those things are
just
going, it's a
drives.
buzz.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's,
Oh,
they vibrate, but at pretty
the
low
vibrators.
frequency.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Those are pretty
Interesting.
awesome devices too. Delco Remy, as in Dayton Electronics Company.
Right.
You
I saw
adjusted
that
them
in
with a
museum
needle nose
somewhere.
pliers.
Yeah.
You bent stuff.
No, it was in
Yeah.
Dayton.
That, we
Delco
were in
Remy.
Dayton.
That's when we were in Dayton, and I learned
That's
about
right.
that. Yeah, Delco Remy.
Yep. Our next question is from Rex, who's trying to avoid sludge, which sounds like the title of a really late night horror movie. But so what's the sludge that ate Chicago or something? I'm sorry, Rex. I'm just in a mood today. I don't know
You
what's
certainly
going
are.
on.
Okay, I've got a new IO 360, and it's only got less than 200 hours on it, and I want to keep it nice and
Yeah.
new and clean. And I've had good experience with synthetic oils in other places. Of course, air-cooled engines are different. Airplane engines are different. And I heard the stories about sludge with full synthetics, and I'm using the Shell semi-synthetic, and I'm wondering what you guys think about that.
Oh, you asked the wrong crowd.
Yeah, you
Oh, boy.
did.
Okay. Why?
It's actually not as bad to use Aeroshell 15W50 in your Lycoming as it would be, say, in Paul Cirrus. But if it were me, I would either run the engine on unleaded fuel if you have an option to do that, or I would use a different oil that's all mineral oil, like the Phillips multi-grade product or the single weight Aeroshells oils, until such time as it's possible to run that airplane on unleaded fuel. The problem is, and everybody I think knows about, or at least has heard about, the debacle that Mobil had with their AV1 synthetic back
in the day.
in the 90s when it
Yeah.
when it was removed from the market in a hail of class action lawsuits because it wrecked so many engines. Synthetic oil has a lot of advantages to it, but the huge disadvantage is the fact that it is not good at holding particulate matter in suspension, particularly lead type particulate matter, lead salts and lead bromides and that sort of thing. And synthetic oil works great in auto engines because they've been running on leaded fuel forever. And it will work great in aircraft engines if anybody ever does come back to market with an all synthetic once we've made the transition to unleaded fuel. But it just doesn't work very well with leaded fuels. The the aeroshell is about a 50-50 mix between synthetic and petroleum based stocks. And so in round numbers, it basically has half the ability to absorb that stuff and keep it in suspension that a full mineral based oil like Phillips XC or aeroshell W100 would have. Whether the aeroshell is adequate to hold that stuff in suspension and avoid sludge formation is a function of several variables. How much blow by the engine has, and how often you change the oil. If for maximum protection against sludge formation, I would use one of the oils that's made of all dead dinosaurs.
Okay.
If you do use the aeroshell 15W50, it would probably be a good idea to change it a little more often than every 50 hours, because it does have a limited capacity to hold that stuff in suspension and not let it precipitate out as sludge.
I understand. The two things I have done to mitigate the inability to hold the particle matter in suspension is one, run Lena Peak, runs a lot cleaner, and the other, and with the gamma injectors, and the other that I do is any oil that I make up between my 30-hour interval is mineral oil. So as the oil gets dirtier, it has a better capacity.
Oh, I see. That's interesting. So
Yeah.
you're making it less semi-synthetic
Right.
as
But
time goes on. That's a fascinating approach.
Why wouldn't you
Right.
just start with mineral oil?
Well, because the synthetic oil is so much better of a lubricant. I mean, if you look at the engineering studies and look at, how well the coefficient of friction under different temperatures and things, it's a far superior lubricant that does not solve the sludge or the solids not being held in suspension.
It definitely has
Yeah.
higher lubricity and greater film strength.
Yes.
The thing you have to understand is that our piston aircraft engines have incredibly modest lubrication needs compared to car engines, because they turn so slowly that lubrication, if there's like 8 different things that we ask our engine oils to do, and lubrication is way down on the list.
Okay.
The biggest challenge for aircraft engine oil is the fact that our engines are absolutely filthy compared to automotive engines.
Right.
And they're filthy because, first of all, they have huge displacement, so that there's a lot more area for stuff to blow by. Second of all, they have miserable temperature regulation because they're air cooled,
Right.
so the clearances are not anywhere near as
all over
tight
the place,
as they
Yeah.
are. So, and third, they're running on this horribly leaded fuel that we wish we could get rid of.
Right. Right.
We may have
Okay,
talked
so-
about that today.
Yeah. So, so the biggest challenge for aircraft engine oil is keeping the engine clean. Keeping it lubricated is pretty far down the list. It also
Okay.
acts as a coolant because the engine, the cylinder heads are air cooled, but like the piston isn't air cooled. There's a lot of stuff in the engine that the only
Right.
cooling it gets is from oil circulation.
Right.
We use it as hydraulic fluid to control prop pitch, to control turbocharger wastegates. There's all sorts of things we ask the oil to do besides lubricate.
Okay.
But lubrication is pretty far down on the list, really, because the engines have such modest lubrication needs. Their biggest challenge is that they're just horribly dirty.
I understand. Okay. Thank you.
Frequent oil changes. Our next question is from Pete, who's hoping for some free flight time. Go ahead, Pete. I don't write these in spot.
Well, thanks, Colleen, Paul, and Mike for taking my question. I purchased a 1971 Piper Arrow back in 2015, and one of the first things I did was I put an electronic engine monitor in it.
Yes.
I bought a JPI EDM 830 engine monitor, but as you probably know, that's not a certificated instrument. I'm not sure if that's the right terminology to use, but
It's
I had to
good.
keep all my original engine instruments in the plane as well. So effectively, I have 2 tachometers in the plane, 2 fuel flow meters, etc. I fly the plane about 150 hours or more per year, and I put,
Excellent.
according to the mechanical tach, I put about 1,200 hours on it since I bought it. The question I have, the issue that I have a question about, is that the JPI consistently shows the engine RPM to be about 50 to 100 RPM higher than what the factory tach is reading.
Of course it
At a
does.
typical,
Totally expected, right?
Yeah.
I guess, the tach is 50 some odd years old, so I guess I should cut it a break. But typically at 2,400 RPM, the JPI is showing about 150 to 100 higher than what the mechanical tach is. I've never done anything to actually see which one is correct, but after
JPI.
I was kind of guessing that. But after 8 years of operation, there's a fairly large discrepancy between what the JPI says is my total tach time and what my OEM shows. It's about up to almost about 200 hours now, difference between the two. So according to the JPI, I've put about 1,400 hours on the plane since I bought it, not 12. Anytime I take the plane into the shop for work, my mechanic uses the original mechanical tach to record the time in the logbooks. And when we do our oil changes, we're measuring 50 hours off in the mechanical tach. But my question is, what's my responsibility for reporting the tach time, such as making entries in the logbook? And then related to that, if I ever sell the airplane, what time should I be telling the buyer that is on the engine?
Two basic rules to follow. Electronic tachs are always more accurate than mechanical tachs. The second rule is, when recording maintenance, always use whatever time runs the slowest.
And when charging for the airplane, use whichever one is the highest.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And that's
so
legit.
The answer is that your mechanic is doing exactly the right thing by logging stuff off of the old original tach. Now, of course, you could screw this whole thing up by having that factory tach sent out and overhauled, and then it would read more accurately. But you have no obligation to do that. But yeah,
you can use whichever one you want. So use the one that's to your advantage, is what
you can use your Apple Watch if you want to.
You can record time with the watch, absolutely.
So I would definitely use the original mechanical tach time as the thing you log in the line. But besides, if you don't do that, then you're going to have like a big jump in the and then you'll have to explain it and stuff. As Lucy used to say to Ricky, you gonna have a lot of explaining to do.
Explaining to do.
Yeah, I'm assuming the issue is just going to continue to grow over time. So
that sounds like something Ricky would have said to Lucy. Yeah. Sorry.
I mean, you could check it with a handheld tach real easily just to verify that the JPI is the more accurate, but we're pretty close.
But it has to be accurate.
Yeah, it is, because
electrons don't lie.
Yeah, and the JPI is counting revolutions. It's not measuring revolutions. And in the world of measuring things, anytime you can count something, it's going to be more accurate than measuring it. So that's from my land surveying days. Another thing, just to give you a little point of information, since you have an 830, the 830 is reading fuel flow. I know this is totally off topic. I'm sorry. Just throw this in there. You're measuring real fuel flow on the JPI, but your fuel flow, the analog fuel flow that's still in the airplane, is a pressure gauge.
Pressure
So
gauge.
now you have a fuel pressure gauge. It's calibrated in gallons per hour, but it's actually a pressure gauge. So when you have an injector clog, you have really helpful information, because if you have an injector clogged, the fuel flow goes down, but the pressure goes up.
Okay. They've always been really close. All the other instruments that are duplicated by the JPI seem to be pretty close, except for the tachometer.
Yep, that's about normal.
Because it's measuring in a modern way.
Yes.
It's using a Hall effect sensor, Paul?
Yeah.
Yeah, if he has
On
the
the
one that's
mag?
on the
Yeah.
on the magneto.
On
Yeah.
the mag,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
So very
Yeah, it
much,
also, we replaced one of the mags with electronic mag, so I don't think that made any difference, but yeah.
No, because you
Nope.
keep the Hall effect sensor on the original
on the
mag.
tracker mag, yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
A
so that
follow-up.
means when you do a mag check, the RPM, no, it doesn't make
It goes
go
to
away,
zero.
'cause- No, it does not with a Hall effect sensor. If you were on a P lead, it would go to zero, but a Hall
Yeah,
effect
yeah, yeah,
sensor
yeah.
is just measuring the rotating magnet
RPM.
assembly,
Right.
which it still keeps rotating even when you turn the mag
Yeah.
off.
Yeah. When I
Right.
switched to test my sim, which is a Surefly, my
Mhm.
RPM reading goes to zero because I'm only tapping
Mhm.
off RPM from the
From the P lead.
magneto. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
So interesting.
You had a
A
follow-up?
related,
Go ahead.
yeah, really kind of a related follow-up question. You might know that the Arrow's got an operating restriction which prohibits prolonged
Yeah.
operation between 2100 and 2350 RPM.
Vibrator.
Yeah. So, in cruise, I'm using the JPI to set the RPM. So I set it at 2400. And then if I look down at the original tach, the
You're right
original
there.
needle is
Yellow.
pointing right in the
Yeah.
red zone there.
Yeah.
Just
So
ignore
again,
it.
I've always assumed that the JPI was accurate, but
Yeah.
just
Mhm.
wanted to get your opinion if this was advisable or if I should really keep that needle out of the red zone.
Here's a helpful
JPI.
hint. Go get yourself some masking tape and cover up all of the old original tach except for the
Except
hour meter
Hour
readout.
meter reading.
Okay.
But be sure and take that off if the FAA wants to do a ramp check.
Okay.
Always remove the masking tape before the FA shows
Before the
up. And the duct tape.
And the duct
and
tape,
the electrical
yeah.
tape. No. Great. Online, just use the information that's to your best advantage. The JPI when you need to be accurate, and the other time you need to
You wanna be
rack
slow.
up
Yeah.
maintenance
And-
time. You want to be slow.
And this is not cheating. This is legitimate. This is
No, it's fine.
how everybody does it. So
Playing the system.
you're
to your
you're not
advantage.
lying to the buyer someday.
It's like
'Cause
it's
what
like
you'll
taking
do, because-
advantage of-
Yeah, the fact
Okay.
that you called in when you get ready to sell the airplane, you're going to tell the person you're selling it to, hey, this is what it's doing, because you won't be able to help it. That's just
Yeah.
that's the way you're going to be. And it said, but legitimately, the tax says this.
Okay.
You're not the only one that has this issue. So a lot
Yep.
of people do this, and
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I should have paid the extra money and just got the certificated instruments, but then I'd have
For
200 more
930.
hours on my engine right
Yeah.
now. So,
Yeah.
No,
I
I,
don't know.
I think you're doing great.
yeah, no, you're doing fine. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Pete. Great question.
Thank you for your time.
Appreciate the call,
All
Pete.
right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
That's it for this episode. Hopefully we got a few things right this time. Let us know and keep sending us those tricky questions. You can email us at podcasts@aopa.org.
We'll see you.
Bye bye, everybody.